Welcome to the podcast. It's the worst territory in the world. Personalities, history, and other stories. We know you're craving for more knowledge. Let the champions get their glory. It's the worst territory in the world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Worst Territory in the World. I am your host, Chris Goff. My co-host, Gabe Miller, still out on assignment. Now, as you know, this podcast is about what some may call the worst territory ever, the Central States Territory, and more specifically, Kansas City. Of course, we all love it because we grew up here. But we've had many interviews with some people in the past and some more modern takes, you know, the NWL, which is a promotion in Kansas City here in the last decade or so. But this week, we're going to talk to a guy that was sort of in the middle of all that. He's a very good friend of mine. You know him as Ace Steel. Ace has been a contributor to the WWE as a producer and an agent at the Performance Center and at live events. He, of course, moved on to a backstage role at AEW, being best friends with CM Punk. But he got his start in Chicago, and he moved to Missouri later on to get the tutelage of Harley Race. And he had a lot of stories being with Harley in Missouri. A lot of his memorable matches we'll talk about, and we'll talk about the ending of his career in-ring where he was with Metro Pro Wrestling, NWL, and others. But it was a great talk with Ace, and let's get to that interview right now.
It's the worst territory.
I am joined now by a longtime friend of mine and a man that has made his way around all levels of professional wrestling, not only just in the Central States area, but basically around the world. He's my friend Ace Steel. Ace, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Chris, how are you doing on this fine afternoon?
It's great. Baseball season's here. The Royals can lose 100 games, but it doesn't matter because means summer's right around the corner, so I'm looking forward to it. Are you going to go to any games this year down in Florida?
Florida, I should. Steve Carino loves going to games, and I do love a good baseball game, and I try to get back to Chicago to go to see the Cubbies at least once a year, and that's kind of fallen off the last couple of years. Pandemic kind of hosed that, but hoping maybe this year I could at least get up there for since my wife is a Dirty Bird Cardinals fan.
She is.
She is, and I would like to get up there for a Cubs-Cards game at some point. So you never know. We'll see.
I'm surprised you married her considering she has a Cardinals tattoo.
Oh, that tells you how cool she is otherwise, because that thing is just not going away. Not her, but the tattoo.
We're talking about Lucy Mendez, who has been a guest on here before, and she's a great friend of mine, and obviously Mrs. Ace Steel. But
she is.
Ace, this is a podcast, as you know about. It's called The Worst Territory in the World, about Kansas City mainly, but the Central States Territory. And you're a guy who obviously spent a lot of time around here, but you're originally from Chicago. Before we make our way to the Kansas City Central States area, how did you get in? Because, of course, when I first met you, I knew all about the Second City Saints, and I knew your relationship with, Adam Pearce and Cole Cabana, CM Punk, the likes. And I knew that you had some training, obviously, with Harley. But how did you first break in?
So up in Chicago, we got everything, the melting pot I grew up on AWA, but when the big boom of the 80s, I got every promotion on our UHF stations. And WWF wasn't even the top for me. It was NWA, AWA, World Class, all that stuff. So anyway,
sure.
Branching off from there, the only thing I ever wanted to do, and even my Young Guns came out when I was in high school, the movie with Emilio Estevez.
Oh yeah,
and I can recall having to do a paper on some subject, and I was hot about that movie because it was awesome, so I was all over it. And I remember this is how well known of a wrestling dork I was, because I had done it at my homecoming shows in front of the homecoming crowd, like on a stage in the gym. My teacher recommended, why don't you just do something on wrestling? And I was like, because I know that stuff. I'm bored. I want to do Young Guns. I want to do Billy the Kid. She's like, just do wrestling, knowing I'd get a better grade. And I was like, all right, fine. So when I graduated in 91, I had looked up wrestling schools, and I even looked up Stu Hart's. You had the Monster Factory. I can't think of anything else really, except for Windy City Wrestling, which appeared on Sports Channel in Chicago. And you had your sports channels all around. We'd get stuff from Florida, so I would see some Florida wrestling in different offshoots. But Windy City Wrestling was on Sports Channel. Could have been on a UHF channel at some point while I was still in high school. So this seemed like a legitimate, just smaller promotion, and even Heyman on his DVD talks about how he booked there and would bring in the original Midnight Express worked there, the Battle of the Bam Bams, Gordy and Bigelow and Brody worked there. So the guy who ran that was a guy by the name of Sam DeCero, who was a worker. His greatest claim to fame was teaming with Eli the Eliminator, who you may know from Texas Wrestling and UWF.
Okay.
Who to me was a legit big guy, badass. In fact, the shows I worked with him, this is the first time. Not that I wanted to catch a peek, but he had his privates pierced, and I was like, "Who does that?"
Well, that's interesting. Our friend Michael Strider, I always tell him, like, let me know. He has a tattoo shop now. And I'm like, and a piercing shop. So let me know when the first Prince Albert comes in, because I want to know who gets one of those nowadays. But yes, go on.
Yeah, funny enough, I worked for Prince Albert later in life. Right?
Exactly.
Anyway, so they would run the amphitheater, which I actually think one of my first shows I'd seen as a kid. My parents were wrestling fans, and my dad had taken me, I believe, to the amphitheater when I was really little, probably 5 or 6 years old, to see shows. So they ran the amphitheater a lot. They ran local shows around, and me and the high school buddy, Danny Dominion, who ended up running the wrestling school together, he was a year behind me in high school, and we would just follow these shows everywhere, the Windy City shows. Well, they had a school, oddly enough, that was not, it was kind of in an area that we hung out. Harlem Avenue and Irving Park was the cross streets, and there was a giant mall over there, big shopping area, and it had the Windy City School tucked behind some building just up the road a little bit. So for a kid who didn't drive, I didn't drive until I got to be probably about 20 years old. Didn't need to, because I had either someone had a car or I had the bus system. I had the CTA system or rode my bike. I could go to wrestling school, ride the bus there. So when I got out of high school, my mom made me a deal. She's like, you need a backup. I need you to go to school and make sure you have a backup plan, which has served me well my whole entire life, having that piece of paper. And I'll let you go to wrestling school. So in 91, I broke in. It was about the summer. I went to the Windy City School and signed up. And they had a host of guys there that were beyond Sam DeCero, who ran it, who never really was the name of the business, but started with Dick the Bruiser down there. And people in Indiana and Chicago will know the name Paul Christie. Savage was over, the Poffos were kind of around the Bruiser area, and whoever else was down there doing stuff. But the offshoot of Chicago wrestling, I'm trying to think of the name who ran up there, and it was Bob Saber, maybe, I think was the name, something like that. Local guys that were enhancement guys / job guys that did jobs for AWA. They were there helping train. So that's what exactly broke me in 91. And I was there for a couple of years until Dominion started. And then oddly enough, a job that I had gotten with the Nielsen TV ratings, my shoot job, brought me down to Clearwater, Florida to train for 3 months. And after gathering, whatever knowledge I needed for said job, my destination was not Chicago. I happened to find out I was going to Kansas City. So I moved to Kansas City in 93. Late 93, 94.
Okay. So at that point, let's see. So what was the scene like in Kansas City? Because I know you brought up the Monster Factory, and I know you've told me a little bit about this before, because Billy Howard, who was a wrestler originally I believe he started in the AWA, but he made his home here in Kansas City, and he's still around. I love Billy Howard. He's a fun guy. He was on the documentary that I made about Kansas City wrestling, and he's a great dude. But he had an affiliation with the Monster Factory on the East Coast, right?
What he had, I don't know his exact affiliation. One of the guys that ran it, he did train with Larry and the Headbangers, and apparently he trained out there. It was a Kansas City resident, and Billy Howard somehow tied into that. So I'm going to guess that Billy. I really don't know who had the money or the stake in the thing. I think Billy did have something in it. I've honestly never talked. I haven't seen him since the 90s, so it'd be great to sit and talk with him someday just to hear some stories. But yeah, Billy had a hand in it. Before I jump to KC, I wanted to throw one thing out there, is that although I trained at an independent organization, which again, I didn't know what the hell independent wrestling was, because we were only to work for this Windy City Wrestling. When I went to Florida for job training, well, I didn't pay those guys money for it, so it's kind of written off.
Yeah.
In Windy City Wrestling. I was not 21 yet, so I couldn't go out and have a beer or do anything. I was 20 years old. I picked up a paper one day and saw there was wrestling at the Tampa Sportatorium, 106 North Albany. And I took my happy ass up there and saw people wrestling. And it wasn't the greatest thing, but it was something I could do. So I called for my boots and my gear and had it sent to me. And that's when I figured out you could wrestle anywhere. You were, a hired gun. You could go wherever you wanted. Like, I had no idea that's how it worked.
Sure.
Because I walked up to someone and said, "Hey, I wrestled a little bit. I worked. Okay, get your stuff, get in the ring." And I got in the ring. And they're like, "All right, you're booked." And so, though I made no money, I occupied my time for a few months. So when we got to Kansas City, I was looking for something to do. Now I know, okay, I can go out there and work. There's other places. Like, I couldn't stand dealing with promoters, not because I didn't like them. It's just something that I wasn't accustomed to doing. I just wanted to work and wrestle because I was not good. But yeah, the Monster Factory appears, and I end up starting to wrestle local shows around Kansas City.
So what were those like? I mean, who were your anyone of note that were running these shows at the time? Obviously, this is pre-Harley. So what?
Yeah.
Pre-Harley, you being involved with Harley anyway. He's still working at WCW at that time, right?
Yeah, I believe he was, because WCW would still come to town and run Memorial Hall. I actually went and watched a couple of house shows there, and I saw Harley around, and got backstage once or twice, and or would just watch the shows. But yeah, before Harley opened up a school, that was so. I don't know. I can't remember exactly who ran shows, but on those shows, Pork Chop Cash was on some.
Oh yeah.
UWF guy, that the Wild Thing Steve Ray guy, that guy was on it. He was on a couple. Bob Orton Jr. was on it. Foley came in. Beaumont Club in Kansas City. I don't know if the Beaumont still exists in Westport.
It does not. I mean, it's still there, but it's not the Beaumont Club anymore. In fact, I don't think anything is there now. But people don't understand that the Beaumont Club is sort of that's a quietly. So it's a quiet wrestling auditorium in Kansas City history because no one really remembers it, but there was a ton of shows in there, including midget shows a lot. And,
okay.
And I remember people talking because it just doesn't seem like a wrestling place because it's a bar and basically you're going to hit your head on a backdrop, right? I mean, the ceiling's not very high.
Right. But yeah, I remember working that's the first time I met Foley, and I never paid attention to his gimmick. And I remember him coming back, and after he cut a promo in the ring, he's like, did that sound all right? And I just looked at him and said, "Yeah, you did your gimmick. You did it." Like I kind of like mimicked him, and he goes, "You didn't listen to it?" And then I realized he was a smart guy because of all the things he did to his body. I couldn't fathom that there was a brain up there.
You would have no
lo
idea.
And behold,
yeah.
There's so many. I mean, well, look at me. I fall through. You go on YouTube and Ace Steel's Death, and I fall off a ladder through 2 tables. Like, there's something wrong with all of us. But no, he was a very intelligent guy. He was also the first guy I saw sell gimmicks like he did, not just his 8x10s. He was in between a WCW run, so he's selling foam belts, all kinds of wacky T-shirts and stuff. Like, I was just like, wow, this guy's got like a whole like box full of crap that he's selling. He's an indie guy trying to make a couple bucks. So, who else? There were shows like I started working in Kansas. Missouri, you had to be regulated just like you do now, or you had to have your license. And I worked a couple shows. I worked a show with Dick Murdoch on there, and Jeff Gaylord, who just recently passed.
Yes.
Chris Hero has an interview with Jeff Gaylord I need to watch just to watch. Who else? That, as far as I can remember, until I worked for Harley when I saw more of the local guys.
Sure.
Like that used to work Central States.
Yeah. So it's just odd that you ended up in Kansas City, being going from Chicago, Florida, then here. I mean, Mike George is a guy that he started in Florida and ended up in Kansas City, not necessarily from here, but.
Right.
Yeah, I don't like. So, what was your time like? I mean, did you like it here? You had never been here. Did you have any kind of historical, thought on Kansas City at that point, being from Chicago?
As far as the city itself, I always laugh that it's called Kansas City because the downtown is just night and day compared to Chicago downtown. They're just two different things.
Very suburban Kansas City, yes.
Yes. So now downtown, like the Power Light District's a little more downtowny to me and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That feels more with the was it T-Mobile Arena down there, all that stuff. It's a little more of the downtown feel I get now. Back then, I didn't really feel it that way, but I did love Kansas City. I love the town, and this is not just cracking jokes. Like I used to work. I started working in St. Louis when I was in Kansas City because it was another place to get work, and I just always had a better affinity. More. I was more affectionate towards Kansas City. St. Louis was never really my favorite place.
Well, it's the STD capital of the world. I don't know if you know that. So that's probably
is
one.
is that is that St. Louis or East St. Louis?
Well, it's all one city. I don't care. It doesn't matter.
I got you.
But
Right.
no, I like to throw shade at St. Louis. But no, but yeah, it's just interesting that you were there even before. I don't think a lot of people would know that you were there even before Harley started running. Because as far as I knew your history, I didn't really realize that you were there quite that early. So
Yeah, yeah. That's I can't. So it's pretty much the precursor to running a wrestling school because I was early 20s, knew I really wanted to wrestle, though I had a really good job, which allowed me to go anywhere on any weekend. There was nothing that was running 5 days a week anymore. I could have fallen into USWA, which I think was the only territory left that really ran like a territory.
sure.
But I don't know. It's I always call my degree and the good jobs I've had as a blessing and a curse. The blessing that I always had something to fall back on and had a gig, but the curse of I was never backed against the wall to fight for my dinner with that entity. With wrestling as my main focus. Although it pretty much was, everything took a backseat to wrestling for me. You know what I mean?
Sure. No, I mean, as just knowing you as long as I have, I know that has always been a very important part of your life. And it is for
Indeed.
most people that enjoy it and get the bug. I mean, you sort of have to work the rest of your life around it, which sometimes can be difficult. So,
Indeed. No shit.
but what about, so did you just stay in Kansas City all the way through when you started working with Harley and meeting him, or did you go back and forth to Chicago a lot?
I would go back and forth to Chicago. I'd pop up to Milwaukee and work for MAW up there, which is where I first would run in. Actually, Adam Pierce's first day was a day I wandered back to Chicago on a trip, and Danny and I went to our what was one of our former trainers at Windy City. A guy named Sonny Rogers had broken away from Windy City, and he was opening up a school, which is actually down Broadway and Lawrence, are the two cross streets. And I say that because across the street is the Aragon Brawl Room, affectionately known because it was a lot of concerts were there, including ECW ran there at some point. But we saw a lot. There was a lot of concerts there that were like hardcore heavy metal concerts and stuff like that. And Pierce's first day, he says, was he came to. I don't know if he signed up or how exactly it went. That's how bad my brain is, and I should know this. But he walked in, and Danny and I were helping put the ring up because all Danny and I wanted to do was get in the ring and work and just do something because we knew each other like the back of each other's hand. Like whatever, we know exactly what we're talking about, how to work each other, how to team, all that.
Sure.
Excuse me, all that good stuff. But no, I'd go back and forth. I'd work some local shots in Chicago. I'd work some things in St. Louis for good old Steve Murphy, who runs a bar out there now in St. Louis. Next time I'm out there, I'll try to stop by. It's never really where I'm staying, but I would love to catch up and BS with him.
That's called Murphy's on 21, right? Or it's
oh, there you go. Yeah,
I believe that's the name of his bar. Yeah.
Steve Murphy, a guy named Derek Stone, who's a local like Midwest guy.
I've heard of him.
Worked
Yeah.
a lot of places. Yep. He I worked a lot with Stone in the early days. We would get booked in workplaces, and Bob Orton Jr. was brought in because he was local, and I have it finally. I got it on DVD. I had a singles match with Bob Orton. It really opened my eyes to show me like you don't learn in this business. It's just like anything. To me, you'll never know everything about this business at all. If you think you know it all, or you're just phenomenal at this and don't have to listen, you're a moron. Bob Orton showed me so much in one match, and then was gracious to me to give me a match that was competitive instead of I had already actually worked him in a job match for the old AWF, Alperstein's AWF in Chicago. Coincidentally, I popped in on July 4th weekend, and Hey, you want to make $100? Sure. Put some tights on. I went and jobbed the Bob Orton.
So was that the
Um,
AWF that had the rounds, and it was the Sergeant Slaughter, and was on TV for a little bit? I've seen DVDs.
yep,
That
yep.
was on
One
like
in the
it was on Channel
yeah.
62 here, I believe, and it was on
Oh,
weekends,
really?
and it was weird to see it because being a WWF fan, there was a bunch of former WWF guys on there. So did you work at taping, or did they just have house shows?
No, no, legit. I'm gonna say I don't know if it was Cicero Stadium, but it was in Cicero, Illinois, which is it's a south suburb of Chicago itself, just like half hour away from the city limits, if that, or border town, I should say. And we just happened to be out there on July 4th. I was hanging out. Danny couldn't wrestle because he was still at Windy City, but someone was like, "Hey, you want to make $100?" And I'm like, "I'll go. I'll make $100 while I'm in town doing nothing and just to wrestle." And another eye-opening experience, just the job to a guy like that to where I'm a sponge learning stuff, and then to a few years later, fast forward to '97, where I got to work him. I think it's '97 or '98. It had to be '97, I think, that I worked him for Steve Murphy, and just like I was enamored with Bob Orton. I was like, holy crap, the smoothness of this guy. It also let me know size difference. I've never been tall. So he was just a gigantic man to me,
He
and
is.
he is. And he was able to work and even it out enough where he made it competitive with me. I learned so much out of that. I also learned, you've heard the term policeman, and I could tell right away that he could take me down, tie me up, and just ruin my world if he so chooses to.
Yeah.
And he didn't. He was great with me, but I could feel it. I was like, okay, because I amateur wrestled 1 year and I was terrible at it. I'd probably be a better amateur now, being a pro wrestler, knowing how to just balance and things like that, and leverage. But he just showed me so much in one match that I was like, okay, like things like that are the things that would keep me going. Like, okay, there's so much to learn. I'm getting there. I'm getting better. My body's changing. I'm getting bigger. I'm small. Again, I had to work to get the frame on me to get respect and not be just a skinny kid out of high school.
But you always had the crazy A size, which actually that always helped you during your life, I'm sure, because when people see you and meet you, you look very intimidating.
I would say that evolved over time. I'm not going to say that started coming about late '90s. Like I was doing legit. I loved Memphis wrestling. That's how I learned how to punch, emulating how they throw punches and what they do things. I always wanted to be a Memphis type wrestler.
Sure.
I loved how they did things. I loved the personality, like, in pro wrestlers. I just listened to, I'm reading Steve Kern's book, but also was listening to a podcast he was doing an interview on, and his advice, you take it, all guys that train, like, I like to hear different trainers talk about their techniques. And he says, take 5 wrestlers that you like and take the best parts of them and kind of throw them into your character and, see what works for you or something from them. And that's kind of what I was, I'd love a Bret Hart or even the Freebirds. I love the flash of the Freebirds. Like, I love stuff like that, or a rock and roll gimmick. You try all that stuff, and then eventually it starts settling into, I look like a maniac, if I'm just walking around.
Yeah.
But that also evolved as I got more, put more muscle on my frame to be that person. I had to build who this wrestler was.
Sure, sure. And I mean, yeah, everything you said there makes complete sense. I mean, going back to Bob Orton, yeah, it's easy to see how Randy is so great because obviously he's the third generation of guy. But I think Bob Orton Jr. and he still wrestles for Herb Simmons and SICW, and I saw him and Tony Ellis won tag belts over there last week. And it doesn't matter because like Bob Orton Jr. was so smooth, and I think he's pretty underrated. Like he was, he's paired with Piper all those years, but I don't think he really gets the credit for how good he was. And he was pretty ripped then, like very lean, but big. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's so great. I actually just told somebody last weekend that they should look up some Bob Orton because, the person I was talking to had some size to him. I'm like, you've got size, and now you need to work on, the way you deliver things, your strikes and things like that. I'm like, Bob Orton's a great guy to watch. Like I would point someone to DiBiase if they had a large frame for the way he moves and grooves, like when you start to emulate something and then make it your own, Yeah, Orton was great. And back then we didn't have the internet, so obviously I knew who Bob Orton was, but I didn't know he was in the, I pull up a magazine, so I'm looking up Bob Orton stuff, and lo and behold, he was in the match with Morocco the day Dynamite's back went out.
Oh, okay.
And so
He
he's
was
telling me
tagging
the
with
story.
Morocco with Fuji, right? That's when during that era.
Yeah, he's in the ring with Dynamite, and he's like, I did a drop down, turned my back, took the ref, and Morocco's supposed to put the knee up. He turns around and Dynamite's on the ground, and I remember his words. He's like, be back, be back, and in Bob Orton voice, and he's like, damn, Don, what the hell did you do? And he just, Dynamite's back famously just went out.
Wow.
Like it's not like he took a stiff blow. He just hit the ropes and it went, it just popped, and he was essentially that was the down. Started to be, the downslide for Dynamite's career.
Well, he's one of the guys you obviously he makes me you make me think of Dynamite Kid and dare I say Chris Benoit, but you're sort of in that the size, the intensity, the way you move, the way you look. I mean, you come from that line, I feel.
Well, I dare say by design, but yes, I guess so. Like, broke my heart with obviously all the stuff that when you idolize certain guys, but the Benoit thing, and you're like, what the hell do holy
Yeah,
shit, like
it
you
was.
can't fathom this.
No one saw that. I worked with Chris Benoit at WWF, and he was a sweetheart. I mean, he was a nice dude. Like, I mean, obviously, and what he did was horrendous, and he's a horrible person, I guess. But
Sure.
up
Oh
until
yeah.
that point, no one would have called that. In fact, my friend Seth, when he was working up there, and he wanted to quit multiple times before he finally did. One of the reasons why he didn't is because he loved working with Benoit and Eddie Guerrero so much, just as a producer. So yes, I understand why you would emulate him. And Dynamite Kid, I mean, when I was a young kid watching, the early WrestleManias, and you see that the Bulldogs in their prime there, you're like, I mean, it's hard not to look at Dynamite and be like, he's not the biggest guy, but he's jacked and he can move like just unbelievable.
Oh, indeed. And so yeah, as the years go on, and again, I've never been a big guy, so I'm looking at junior heavyweights. When I'm turned on to uh, Malenko, Guerrero, Liger, even watching Jerry Lynn and 1-2-3 Kid, because they were on when I get home from high school. I'm like, okay, this gives me hope. They're not giant guys. And then I didn't even see actually didn't see Tiger Mask and Dynamite until midway in my career. Like I'd start catching tapes of that. I didn't know about all the tape trading I could have been in on,
Sure.
when I was younger, because I didn't subscribe to any, the newsletters
It was
or,
way more. It was an
send away to
underground thing, I mean, like it wasn't so
Sure.
damn prevalent as it is now.
Right. Right.
I have to
But,
bring up.
yeah, well,
I have to bring
go
up the
ahead.
match that you had with Dominion with the second greatest tag team of all time, the Road Warriors, because I know you bring that up as obviously second to Demolition. I don't have to say that, but no, you had a match with the Road Warriors in Chicago. Was it in Chicago or was it in Minnesota?
It was in Lafayette, Indiana,
I was
actually.
Indiana.
Lafayette,
Okay.
Indiana. Hmm.
You said that's one of your favorite matches, just because. I mean, even at the time, I'm sure, just because. I mean, what a cool thing to do when you're a pretty young guy.
Oh man, like I had started, so being in Chicago was great because we started getting to know the different promoters from around Minnesota. Once the school kicked off, and we had a relationship, going to Minnesota and say working for General Adnan. He promoted show, co-promoted with the promotion there, which is now still Steel Domain. But we'd work with all these promoters, and even Dave Prazak hooked us up with a lot. Unsung, well, now they sing the praises for helping revolutionize women's wrestling, but WWE should really give him a plaque, because if he didn't keep Shimmer going, they would be able to grab just a buttload of women,
Sure.
to work for a division, because he always loved women's wrestling. But Prazak would always have his hands in the cookie jar talking to people and stuff. And we got booked, and I can't tell you the promoter. Well, wait, I think his name's Schwabby Joe, and that's obviously a nickname. But Schwabby Joe had a 2-day run in Indiana. We were to get paid and work, put in a hotel. Basically, the first time I think we were really felt like we were treated like, real pro wrestlers. We were booked, got good paydays, put in a hotel, You woke up the next day, went to a gym, then you had your show the next day. It was a taste of what we were all really wanting. And Adam Pierce was there, Prazak managed Danny and I. And the first night of this 2-night tour, the first night, I can't tell you who we worked, but like Buddy Landell's there, Public Enemy's there, just different people. And the Road Warriors are there. And Dominion went up to Hawk and said, "Hey, are you guys going to be here tomorrow?" And he's like, "Yeah, why? Yeah, we are, because we worked indie wrestling. We knew sometimes people no show, you know what I mean? But Danny was like, "Well, we're supposed to work you tomorrow." So he's like, "Oh, okay." And then they show up the next day, and it was like the biggest. What a freaking honor to work these guys. They had just left New York. It was after the problems that they had all had and all this stuff, and they were out of the contract and all that stuff. This is 98, I believe. I think it's 98. And I can't remember. I have to look at the date. It's on YouTube.
It was 97. It was 98 when they left, because that was after they came back and they were paired with Sonny, and they got
right.
They went through several iterations of it, like Draws got involved and all of that, and then at that point, obviously Hawk his body was failing a little bit at that point, but yes, it was 98.
Okay, so 98, and I mean they come out. We're doing we're wearing the boas. We're doing a bit of a ripoff of a Jesse Ventura / gimmick with Mardi Gras masks, and we were just trying to figure out what we were at. But it was working as a heel team. And Iron Man hits. We're in the ring. I remember Dominion going, I don't know what to do. I was like, "You get the hell out of the ring. When the Road Warriors hit the ring, you leave or they beat you up. You know this." And so they were great to us. It was maybe not even a 10-minute match. But the things they told it, like I dropped Animal with a punch. Like he does a spot where he goes outside, and I go on the floor and I punch him, and he goes down to his knees. And honestly, if you look back in the old '80s, not even Tully and Arn were able to usually drop him with a punch.
That's cool.
Like he didn't go down. Like by this point, they realized if you don't sell, it doesn't work. But
sure.
I laughed because like I was in there with Animal, and Hawk tags in, and he just grabs him and he goes, "Press." And I'm like I got a freaking choice. And I was so thin, he picked me up with ease. So it made him feel like, even though he wasn't the giant Road Warrior from 1985 and 86 that I grew up watching and loved, he just put me overhead. And this ring we were working, it was so stiff, but he tossed me down and I landed so flat and perfect. Like it was so fun. It was such a great test. When we came to the back, they were like, "You guys have such a great gimmick. We could have worked another, 10 minutes. We could have worked a 20-minute match with you guys."
Oh, cool.
You guys, yeah, it was a joy. Like, Danny even did the pile driver spot with Hawk. That's because he called. It's like, "Can we do the pile driver spot where a pile driver you get up?" And he's like, "Yeah, let's do that." They were just fucking great, and it was a great test. Like again, each time I get to these things and it's a test, and you pass that test, and you learn and you keep moving. Like, okay, I'm moving in the right direction, or you can't take that away from me. No matter what in my career, like I would sit back and I didn't make $1 million, but you can't take away that you got to work these guys and get the respect of someone. They tell you not to beat your heroes, and I mean, I didn't go to their house and eat dinner. I just got to work with them, and they weren't dicks, and that was great.
A lot of times in wrestling, that's not the case, that you don't want to meet them because you'll be disappointed. So that's cool that it worked out that way. I think, and
Indeed.
That's a perfect usage of it right there. Like a lot of people, when I was running promotions, I loved bringing in the big names. And for the most part, I always tried to put them with someone that they would either put over or make the other ones look good. Because if you I never understood the indie promotions when I was running that would have two big names fight each other in the card, because it didn't make any sense.
Right.
I mean, this allowed you, obviously, and Danny to have an awesome match with like legends that obviously you grew up watching. And I loved bringing in names like that because, like I joked, but when we brought in Demolition, which obviously even a different era than you're talking, we're talking, 15, 20 years later after what you're talking about. So Demolition is in their, 60s at that point. But it didn't matter because the music hits, they're there. You put them over as much as you can if you're the opposing team, and at that time it was a team here called the Commission, but it didn't matter because they were with them, obviously. But
right.
It's just that is the perfect usage of them, in my opinion, to let the guys that emulated them work them win or lose, it doesn't really matter. And if you get it's harder and harder. It was becoming harder and harder for me to find some of the old legends that were wanting to be that way, to help out, sort of like the Road Warriors did. So that's cool that worked out that way.
Oh yeah, it was amazing experience. Amazing experience.
So how did you go from there? I know there was several years went by there, but how did you finally end up moving on to Mr. Harley Race's academy?
So my school began in '98, and I moved out of I moved back to Chicago from Kansas City because, oddly enough, there wasn't enough wrestling for me. I was sick of the shoot job, and I was like, I am 25. And I was 25 in '98, so I was like, I need to do more. Now's the time. Now is the time. And I'm getting better. There's just not enough. I'm not doing enough. And I'm not in the ring enough. The Monster Factory place had closed. There wasn't a ring to at least get in and train. Again, I needed to excel and fine tune my skills, all this stuff. So Dominion and I ended up talking, and the school came about. Primarily the school was, and when you talk about, I've only been in the business 5 years, but I knew I could train people the way I was trained exactly, but better, because there were things that I learned over that short time of 5 years from working with different people and listening that we could teach other guys. Mainly the schools for us. It was a place where we could go bump around and get better. And if people come along, and then lo and behold, you did have people come, like, Pierce left where he was at, came with us. So that's when we really ran the roads, and he was only in maybe a year or two. So he defected from where he was at, which I later find out got us tons of heat because they hated the fact that these young guys that don't know what the fuck they're doing, blah, 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 blah.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Yeah. And I honestly didn't know that. Like, but I felt some of that around, but I didn't realize some of the people that helped train me were that way. I was like, well, I think about that now, which is why I don't really give them a lot of credit, because I'm like, thanks for breaking me in, but you were a dick later. So,
sure.
Not saying Windy City. Windy City, I actually went back and worked there under DeCero a little later, but no giant affinity for anything. Like, Windy City still existed a long time.
That's a very similar story to most of my friends. Like, the people that actually broke them in, they don't even like giving them credit for, because usually they were just a conduit to get your foot in the door, but didn't really do much for them. That's not an abnormal story in wrestling.
Right. And anyone that ever, like, Adam is so successful now, so anyone talks about me or him doing anything for him, they get kind of, oh, well, I did this for him. Like, he's praised you before. Why do you got your panties in a bunch?
Are you surprised at all at his success right now?
No,
me neither.
Not at all.
Me neither. I thought they should have had. They should have hired him as a worker before they made him an on-air character. I thought when he was
100%
when he was wrestling, you had a match with him like last year in Kansas City in 15, I think it was, and even then, like, as I've gotten older, Ace, and I'm sure you feel this way too, you realize, well, I did as a promoter, wrestlers aren't really great until they've had a lot of the seasoning and they're like 35. Some are that's not everybody, but there's a lot of people that you just get it more when you're older, and for many reasons, experience of life, whatever it is,
Experience of life. The world is different. I had this conversation with Terry Taylor so many times. The folks of today will never learn how to work hurt. And that teaches you to work with limitations. When you can it's somewhat akin to the fact, if I got to work a guy who's 6'5" and I'm 5'8", well, there's only so many things I can do in this match. So that puts me a bit in a box. Now I really got to think and be creative to make this match work, and not just to cut you got to chop the tree down somehow, but I don't always have to work his leg. That's the easy thing to do. But
sure.
Anyway, if I got a guy the same size as me, well then shit, there's nothing we can't do. So now what do we do? We got to narrow it down. And that ties into so many different things and theories about this. But when you are hurt, I actually have a banged up knee a little bit. I'm not going to drop any knee drops on anybody because that's going to hurt. So that also, it doesn't hurt my mobility, but it takes away from me landing on those knees doing certain things. And I've worked with a cracked rib before, and if you've ever had that, shoot, you've never stopped yourself sneezing until you've had a cracked rib. And I figured out I could roll but not take bumps. So there's certain things only I could do. You don't learn how to work until you have limitations, till you've, you know, messed your ankle up and you still have 3 weeks to go on a Japanese tour, till your shoulder's blown out, but you got to tie it up, till a guy like Tugo Scorpio messed up I think it was his bicep, and he had a wrap on it so you wouldn't notice. But I was like, what happened to your arm? And he's like, tore my bicep, but I had to keep working. Because, back then you didn't have a contract. You
Sure.
didn't work, you didn't get paid. So that old school mentality where there is some type of, you're brainwashed to think but when you twist an ankle, and if it's not that bad, you can still figure out a way to wrestle and make the town,
Sure.
And I don't mean to sound like the guy in 1986 that made towns, but in Japan you had to. Like, I taped it, my ankle up every night and would go in there, do what I could do. Next thing you know, I get bumped. I take the heat. I was able to get up, hit one move, make the tag, and finish off the match. But guys, girls don't have the opportunity to learn that way. So yeah, when you become 35 years old, if you've been doing it however long, like, you realize you've worked in front of a lot of people, and you know what works, what doesn't, hopefully for you, or what to do, what not to do, when to do it, when not to do it, where your place on the card is. And yeah, he should have, add back to Adam, he should have been working there as a wrestler because he was damn good, which is why they hired him as a coach, and the fact that he just, bumblefucked into a position where he could, it's really what it was. We need someone to say this in the pandemic era. Adam, go say that. And next thing you know, he's an on-screen guy.
Yeah,
So.
no, he's been on TV a lot. More people know Adam Pearce now, obviously, than they ever have ever. And that's not saying he did it so much as an independent wrestler, as an NWA champion. I mean, going back to working hurt, when he beat Cabana in his 7 Levels of Hate series, match 4 in Kansas City to win the NWA title in Kansas City for the first time in years, he had like 102-3 degree fever, and he felt like garbage, and he hates that match. But I don't care, because we all know the backstory, and it was great. But but he's one of the guys that is always linked with you. And speaking of going back to the Harley situation, like, I remember when I was in college at the University of Missouri in the late 90s, I would go to, there was a company, I don't know if you ever worked for, Midwest Renegade Wrestling, but that was a company that was the first time I ever saw Scrap Iron Adam Pearce with his long flowing locks. And
we were wrestling there at the same time.
Okay,
but not together. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, I just didn't. That's the first time I saw him working around these parts, and I'm assuming he's still based out of Chicago at that point, I guess.
Yes, he was.
Okay.
Yeah, he was.
And at that point, so when you were working at MRW, were you at Harley's yet? Were you living in Kansas City? Where were you?
No, so I was Chicago. I'd come down. So my job could take me to St. Louis for a week, and I would take the booking because I didn't have a lot of bookings in Chicago just yet. And I always liked keeping something to work away from everyone else of what I was doing, because it also gave me just a different flavor, all this good stuff. And I would work, or I was in St. Louis for work, and I was like, hey, I can pick up a booking, or vice versa. Like, you're going to St. Louis this weekend. You want to stay there for the week? All right, I'll take the company pay. You'll pay me to go. I don't have any trans. You know what I mean? So when we opened the school and that happened, we trained a guy who initially wanted to manage but became a ref. And in Illinois, it was still a commission state at that point.
Yeah.
And I don't know the particulars, but I knew this. When WWF came to town, or NWA, AWA, you name it, they had to have a state licensed ref work their show. And then the rest, I think, could be their own guys, but you at least had to have one.
Okay.
And Harley was going to run Monmouth, Illinois, which is right on the border by the Quad Cities. It's like right there. And because Matt Murphy knew of me, and the funny part is, when Dave Marquez found Harley, who wasn't doing jack shit in wrestling anymore, found him and said, hey, I want to use you for this show. And then had a call line bugging me. I don't know how to block that. When
he started World Legion Wrestling, you're talking.
World Legion, and then Dave got pushed out, and it just became Harley's entity. Like, I was already gone. Like, I already left Kansas City. So that's the funny part, is that, like, I finally leave because there wasn't enough wrestling, and then they appear. So Matt Murphy and I actually had some conversations online on AOL. Like he just reached out to me because he actually just wanted to steal the Boas gimmick that I was doing. I was like, I don't care. I didn't invent it, you know. And he knew of me because of Derek Stone, because Derek Stone helped train Matt Murphy. So anyway, Matt Murphy reaches out and says, "Hey, we've got two shows coming up, one in Illinois and one right on the other side of the border. I think it was in Iowa still, and could have been his hometown of Keokuk, not sure. But regardless, they needed to know if I had a ref. I said, yes, I do. He goes, would you want to work it? And I said, sure. That's what put me in front of Harley Race, was doing that, because we had trained a guy that was a ref, a licensed ref in Illinois. And that was by the Iowa, I can't remember which shop was first, but whether it was Iowa or Illinois. But we went down there, worked the show, and I worked a match with future brother-in-law superstar Steve and Matt Murphy, and we did a 6-man. And Harley saw me, and he liked what he saw.
Awesome. So then, at that point, how did that lead to you actually moving down? So at that point, was he still based? Was he in Eldon, or was he somewhere else still? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I believe all of that World Legion, all that shit started in Springfield. And then it migrated to Eldon because Harley always had a spot at the lake, and Eldon ended up being his spot where he opened the gym and had the school and all that stuff. Eldon, 5,000 people, small town. And Harley liked me. I was starting to get pretty jacked up, and he looked at me, and the way I was working, he told me I reminded him of Paul Orndorff. And I said, holy shit.
That's good.
That's a hell of a compliment. Hell of a compliment. And I said, wow, that's a hell of a compliment. And I said, I take that as a hell of a compliment. He's like, you should. And I said, okay, thank you. Well, I kind of thought to myself, he had the school down there, and I really wanted to work for him. So I ended up taking my week of vacation that year and going down to rent a room above the bar there in town. It's pretty open. The town was pretty open. But I rented a room for the week and went and trained at Harley's, and to make the connection, because I was like, well, I called, make sure it was cool, came down, hung out with Matt Murphy. He hosted me, and would get in the ring and work, and then got to make a contact with Harley, where at the end of the week, he was like, do you want to come do some shows? And I said, yes, sir. And I started, that's what kicked off our relationship and rapport, was me driving down to Chicago, from Chicago, doing shows at that point.
Well, I mean, and you were talking about meeting, at this point, Orton and Road Warriors and all these other people. Now here you are with the multi-time NWA champ, so I'm sure that was another level of like, wow, this is awesome. And plus you're being, he's throwing out comparisons to Orndorff, so I think that would be pretty good for you right then.
Oh, that was awesome. And I mean, to be fair, now I'm way more schooled, just like kind of like when I went to Japan and I had to go back and watch more Masao Kobashi, because I didn't watch all of that in the 90s. It's because I was watching the juniors from New Japan, but I had to go back and watch a lot of Harley. Like I do now, I'll still watch Harley stuff. There's so many great things from it. It's a different era, different time, but the things that you can pick up and still utilize are amazing. So I knew how respected he was, and obviously I respected him just who he was, but I only remember the King in WWF. So,
sure.
And again, I wasn't a WWF fan. I'd seen the big shows, but that just wasn't my primary, So if anything, I probably saw more of him working as a manager with Vader than anything. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But I got hooked up with Harley, and as time went on, after I'd worked for Ring of Honor and started getting a buzz and did some TNA stuff, Harley became he was the liaison, my agent for going to Pro Wrestling Noah.
Yeah, so Pro Wrestling Noah, for those who don't know, that's a promotion in Japan. And did you always have, like what a lot of guys say nowadays, that they just want to go to wrestle in Japan? Did you have that burning desire to check that off your bucket list, or was that not really a thing until it became a reality?
That became my only goal in wrestling, because the territories went bye-bye. WWF seemed like just not attainable for me with my size. No matter how big or wide I could be, I was still short. And I looked towards, as we said earlier, the Benoits, the Guerreros, the Malenkos, that style, those people. So I started altering my style and wanting to do that and go to Japan. I thought Japan's the place for me, you know, and I'd gotten by this point, let's say, I ended up moving down to Eldon, Missouri in '04. So I'd already worked Jerry Lynn once or twice. So I'd gotten to work with one of the premier freaking cruiserweights ever and the nicest guy in wrestling still to this day. Um, I saw that and I'm like, this is where I need to go. Japan's the place for me to, you know, make a crack and make some money and give this a good go. So, and that was courtesy of, you know, I got seen by the NOAA office working for Pro Wrestling Iron, working a show. Because my old manager, Ed Schumann, Midwest great, and everyone loves him from the NWA. Well, you either love him or hate him. I love him. He was my first manager in wrestling, and he was the in-between for belts for Reggie Parks and selling them and getting the people, and he painted them too. He did the fine-tuning and paint work on them. He had done the belts for Pro Wrestling Noah, and they when they came to the States, they wanted to know where to go to look at guys to bring Americans over because he had no clue where to grab guys. And that helped Mike Modest and Donovan Morgan get over. And when they had an opening on a show, they said, who would you give this slot to give an opportunity? They need to find their way here. Danny and I were given that spot. And Danny and I were not friends anymore by '04. When was it? '03, it's '02 or '03. Whenever we did this show on Pro Wrestling Iron, the school had closed. We were not close anymore, but we knew we could team and make an impression. And off of that is when I got chosen about a year later, and I went under Harley's umbrella.
With Harley Race now at this point, and he's your agent going to Noah, what did your relationship? I know through the years when I started booking you in, you know, the 2010s, I know at that point you would go work shows for Harley, especially big shows for him because, you know, on his camp weekends or whatever. I guess before I even get to that, localizing it more to the territory that I'm talking about, what did Harley ever talk to you about Kansas City? Did he mention any of these old timers? Did you see any of the other guys around the Central States territory during your time with Harley? What did he think about Kansas City? Because from all indications, he obviously really liked it.
Yeah, and actually a key point I left out when you said I started talking to Harley, and I can't believe I left this out, was the bottom line was I was told I was good and I knew what I was doing, but I wasn't second generation. I didn't come from named people. You know what I mean? No one broke me in, and, you know, Tracy Smothers was broken by Steve Kerr and Stan Lane. Like, you can't, you know, and Stan Lane was broken by Ric Flair. Like, you got people with names behind them. I needed a named person to put their stamp on my work, and that's what Harley was for me. And I always strive for the unsolicited compliment. Like, I don't run up to you to like ask you, how did I do? How good was I? How good was I? I want to hear the feedback, but to hear the praise was amazing for me. And that's what I got from Harley, which is why I set my sights to him. Shit, this guy likes me. And he likes what I do. Well, I'm going to go try and make this my thing and my contact. And lo and behold, there's a famous story Pug tells about us driving and him throwing up in the car and blah, blah, blah at Mid-American Wrestling. And Harley, you know, that's when I told Harley, I said, I want to go to Japan, Harley. He's like, I'm your guy. Said, yes, sir. You know, and, but Harley, he loved Central States. He loved Kansas City. I know he talked about Geigel a lot, just loving Geigel. He could recite even to the days where his mind was way gone. You could ask Harley how to get to St. Joe from Mexico, Missouri, and he'd give you some back road or tell you how to get to Hannibal. You know, you wouldn't take I-70 all the way over here, then go north once you cut here. He could tell you the back roads to get here, there, and everywhere.
Sure.
That was always in the back of his mind from being an old farm boy up from, was it Quitman, Missouri up there. He was just Missouri, is how he would say Missouri. Missouri. And he I don't know. He had such a great love for that stuff. Like, I even laughed that he had Matisik's book, and Matisik had it seemed like he had a great respect for Harley, but didn't like it when they took over St. Louis.
Sure.
And to be fair, as much as I love Harley, and he is basically my wrestling dad, like, his booking was just kind of, it was always the same finish, always this, always that. So I don't know if that was just him, And even I'm looking at Ole Anderson's book right here. I think Ole says like the same thing. Like he just had a great respect for Harley, but he wasn't over the top with his booking. He just always loved Missouri, and then when he treated his World League Wrestling kind of as his territory again. It's like he never left. So he wouldn't like it if you went and worked for some other promoter around there without his blessing.
So I talked to Matt Murphy about this and others. Like when I was running in like 2010, he still had a small mindset like that. And I think Dan Geyer was talking to me about this. It's like I didn't, working at WWF and then going to the Indies was backwards because I didn't really understand the rules to indie wrestling when I first got into it. Like stuff like this where I would have to worry about Harley Race being like furious with me because I'm trying to book Matt Murphy or Steve Fender or somebody like that. And
Right.
and I think he was sort of past that. I mean, I'd already met him, thankfully, through the documentary I did, so he knew who I was. I guess he knew my background to a degree, but I understand what you mean by that because the other people that had promoted shows around these parts before me had said, you better get his permission or he's going to be pissed. And I don't want Harley Race pissed at me at any age,
Right. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. I went and worked for, I think it wasn't MRW anymore, but it was Big Ben running in St. Louis. And it was at a time where,
Was that
so here's the
Gateway?
thing about, there you go.
Yeah.
Gateway. Here's the thing with me. I was Harley's guy, except I wasn't born and bred there. So there was a difference. I could go to Harley and say, Harley, even though I was his tag champ at the time, Harley, I can't work this date. I'm already booked, say, for Ring of Honor. I get paid a good chunk of change right there. And Harley would say, okay. And he would move on. Or I would say, Harley, I would do it the right way. I'd say, Harley, I can squeeze some money out of this promoter. You mind if I take this show off? Not a problem. I can't argue with that. So when I went to Gateway, I didn't tell him. And I was his tag champ at the time. And this was a total case of ask for forgiveness, never for permission here. That I went over and worked. I lost the first night, won the second night, came back and told him that Monday what I did. I said, Harley, I had an opportunity to make some money, and I did. I came back with money from both nights. They put me up. This is what I did. I jobbed one night. Second night, I went over. I'm just letting you know I did it so you don't find out any other place. And he looked at me and said, okay. And then he was not happy about it because he told Steve or somebody, maybe Matt, I don't remember who it was, you know what he did? He worked for, but I don't know that it really got me. He either forgot about it or he appreciated that I told it to him up front because he never was mad at me for stuff like that if I did it the right way. If he had a show and Matt Murphy was booked on it or Trevor, there was no freaking way they were going anywhere else but working for him.
Sure.
But because I came from somewhere else and he just always realized that I was I was his guy and he protected me and would use me, but also, because there was something about that I was always able to say, hey, I need to go do this. And there'd be no heat on it.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, I think even Harley understood that he, there is still that unwritten thing with a lot of those older promoters that used to be workers where, yeah, like you said, if you didn't come up through his school, if he didn't start you from scratch, like he didn't necessarily, quote unquote, own your rights at that point. I mean, I think every promoter, even myself, was always like, you're always sort of like, your confidence takes a hit when they go work other shows, because you take it personally because you're so involved in it, and I get it. Totally understand.
Yeah, exactly.
And what does Harley have to prove at this point? I mean, he's Harley. He's not me or somebody else. So, but at the same time, I still understand his thoughts on that. I started booking you in, I believe, 2012, 13, something like that. And I had never met you before. I had known Adam Pierce for a while. Colt had been in, and I remember you showed up for the Colt Pierce match, and that might have been the first time I met you. Yeah,
that is. You asked. I think you inquired about me working before that through somebody. I don't know if it was. I don't remember who it was through.
Might have been Murphy or somebody. Yeah,
it could have been. It could have been anybody. I did know. I didn't know Lucy very well because she had started with Harley, but it could have been anybody. At that point, obviously, it was just friends with Lucy. But I don't know who it was, but you had inquired, and at that point, I had my dips and doodles. Like I seemed to work somewhere once a year just because the itch would get me because I basically stopped in '08, '09,
Well,
somewhere in there.
that's when you were working, like, you had your big match with Regal. You were working these, like, one-offs with Harley every once in a while, and I'm
Right.
like, oh,
Right.
like, he's working. Let me get him over here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was in obscurity, and then Regal was coming down for a camp, and he was like, "They want me to work. Do you want to work?" And like, he asked me to wrestle him, and I said, "Well, who turns that down? Like, I'm gonna have to get my
Nobody.
fat ass in shape, you know?" Yeah. And then he did the same thing to me the next year, and I said, "Man, you are killing me," because I had to get in ring shape. I wasn't working, so I had to. And oddly enough, he was using me for ring shape as well to like because he would go on the first match. He would go on to work Danielson that year with the famous where he comes out to the man's man
Oh,
music or
yeah.
whatever that was.
Love that
That
music.
was right after me, and then the next year was in NXT when he worked Claudio. Like the year I wrestled him was his last year wrestling because then he had neck surgery not long after that. But
Wow.
he worked Claudio, and that was it. So, but I was kind of his warm up for that other stuff, and he knew I could follow because I'd learned some of the British stuff with him and Dave Taylor. But yeah, I was bouncing around here and there a little bit, and I went up actually to see because I again was removed from wrestling, so I would never see Adam anywhere, and hadn't run into him at all, and came up to watch that match. And yeah, that's the first time I met you. Like, yay, hey Chris, you ever want to work? Nope, see ya.
It was that you were that cordial. Yes.
I think so.
No, but anyway, you ended up working, and we became good friends. And I know that you enjoyed the run that I've never put on YouTube or edited the matches, but that was like 2015-16. You had a bunch of like really fun matches there with friends that we both have friendships with, like the Jeremy Wyatts and the Michael Striders of the world. But then also, the Ricky Mortons, and you got involved with Jim
Yes.
Cornette. Like that was it
Yes.
really helped me obviously to have an Ace Steel and other people, but you were one of the main guys that I enjoyed having you around because you know what the hell you're doing. Because once again, you're like over 35 at that point, so it was you were really good,
I was.
and you knew what the hell you were doing. It doesn't matter ring shape as much as the psychology of it, in my opinion. So you knew what to do, and you were always in shape. As far as a wrestler, I mean, I know the wrestlers are the worst enemies. Or no one's happy with how they look. I get it, but you were
Right.
a great asset to that company, and I enjoyed putting you with all those guys, and we had a lot of fun. We did.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I worked Wyatt, who I think it was 2014.
Okay.
I worked Wyatt, and he was the match itself gave me made me smile because I was like, oh gosh, someone that can wrestle, and because I was. So go back to let's say 2004. I started going to Japan in '03, and your matches are structured a certain way over there, and it's different than American style. But you had to remember everything because there's a communication barrier. So as time goes on, that's when you're working Ring of Honor, and as you get better, you start to have to remember a lot more of the match or what's going to happen because you start putting on elaborate finishes, and that ties into the rest of the match. Now, I would always have a match where there was a lot of improv at the beginning, and always improv throughout the match. But the fact that you had to string together a lot of things, like, actually just started getting to me. I was like, I can't stand trying to remember too much shit. Like, it's over for me. So when I wrestled Jeremy, I didn't want to, call a bunch of things. And that goes into my last run with World League Wrestling when Harley was still of sound mind and body. I went over there to work, and then I figured out that locker room's not the same anymore. And I just kind of got a Debbie Downer on that. But that was the last year Adam wrestled before he became the coach at the PC and then went on to where he's at now with WWE. But 2015, I think Metro, is that when Metro closed? It was going to open again and closed. How did that go? I don't
Oh, it was
recall.
weird. I had because the television station I worked for was called Metro Sports, and they made me do like a little bit of a sabbatical for a while because I couldn't. They were allowing me to do these wrestling shows and then edit the shows on that was like my part of my job, which was great. And
Gotcha.
they wouldn't let me do that for a while, so I had to take I took a handful of months off. Then we came back and we started. At that point, I had run a lot of indie shows, and I wanted to have more fun. Just not necessarily. I wasn't necessarily worried about. I didn't want to lose money, but I wanted to bring in some names and have fun with the guys I know could have good matches with. And you,
Gotcha.
Wyatt, Strider, all those guys. We had, I loved being able to have a match with you and Ricky Morton. That was fun.
And that was after, I believe that was 2015 when I got to have Morton, because you had asked me, Metro Pro started up again. You inquired if I wanted to wrestle, and I said, only if it's fun. I don't know. And then you had to get the title off ACH. So I worked ACH, and that was fun. I had fun with that. And then you were like, well, book it. I'm like, you asked for my bucket list of people. And there isn't many people I've worked that, I know you tried to get Lawler for me, because I'd never worked Lawler. And that probably won't happen ever now.
That
Lawler,
damn Burt
Ricky
Prentice
Morton.
wouldn't hook that up, so that's his fault.
Sure. And I had one other, JJ down in Arkansas. There was another possible link to that. That didn't happen, but you were able to get Ricky Morton, and I was like, holy shit, I get to work. And what people don't understand is, like, back in the day, like, you looked at Ricky Morton against the Road Warriors. Like, I don't think they ever worked, but just pitting those people against each other. Well, those guys got to be small. Ricky Morton is not a small man. He's not a small dude.
Different era. Yeah, he was small in his era.
Right. Especially compared to now.
Sure.
But I got up on Ricky Morton, like, holy shit. And Morton had never heard of me. He'd never heard of me. So, like, he even locked up with me just to see how stiff I'd be. But, and I'm not one to I've never done this, gone up to tell him all the things I've done and who I know and what I do. I'd rather just have them figure it out in the ring, I'm either the shits or not. And we just basically had the finish and went and called the rest. And I loved it. I love it. It's nothing like Adam's got a great one on video where he's in Tennessee and Morton's getting some juice and they're just going back and forth. But Adam's also a bigger dude, and you probably knew Adam more because he was working more of the independents back then. But regardless, I had such an awesome experience. We have the Cornette promo, and that was another thing. You were like, I need a guy who could do, like you said, I need a utility guy. I need a guy that can work a main event when I need it. And I also need a guy just to be a good spot on the show. And there was a need for me to be in a match with Wyatt, and the sole purpose of me being there, I wanted to take a racket shot. That's all I fucking wanted.
Sure.
Footage lost, I guess. I don't know.
And that was probably, and I've known Jim Cornette since '97, and he was great. He was gracious enough to come in and drive in with Black Betty and come in to have a sandwich at Arthur Bryant's and come do that show. And literally, that was about his last year of doing that stuff, because then he became a podcasting mogul and he doesn't have to leave his house anymore. So I don't blame him.
Yeah.
But
good for him. Yeah, I worked with him at Ring of Honor when he had come in just for shots. Like, I first met him in Dayton, Ohio, I think it was. I remember the venue because I was so enamored. He was just cool to talk. He just wanted to sit and talk. And there wasn't a lot of shoot interviews out about a lot of things. But I'm fascinated with guys like Eddie Gilbert, especially guys there's a lot of folklore about because they're gone. They're not here to
passed
tell us
away
themselves.
early, the legends. Yeah.
Yeah. They, his mind and all this stuff. And Lawler was telling me about the loops and how, the whole Memphis territory and how Eddie Gilbert was a Lawler clone. He loved Lawler. I just got to be Cornette. And then we started doing, Gabe Sapolsky booked me when the Saints stopped and Punk went to WWF. He found a use for me in the CZW versus ROH feud because I was a good brawler. I am a good brawler.
Yeah. And,
I had a lot to do with Cornette through that, so that was fun. But yeah, sorry, I digress.
No, I enjoy talking about the memories. So in case no one knows, Metro Pro Wrestling was an independent promotion from like 2010 to 2016 in Kansas City, and we had a lot of fun doing that, and Ace was a big part of that. But then Ace, we moved to the final chapter of the Kansas City stuff I'm going to talk to today, which was the NWL, which we talked with Lucy about this, but there's a whole other level of what an independent promotion could become in the Midwest anyway, because I didn't have a lot of experience with other big indies on the East Coast or whatever, but NWL comes around, and I wanted you to be a part of it in some form or fashion, and that's when you founded the foundation with you and Strider and Wyatt and Lucy, and the very first foundation in wrestling. None of this rip-off garbage they have out there, but
indeed.
yeah, but the NWL. What was your just thoughts about that time of your wrestling career, just that company?
Going back to the beginning, I was going to stop wrestling, as I always do, in 2016, and just lay it off, just back out. Like, at the time, life was different for me, and I just wanted to back out of it. There was nothing I wanted to do on a regular basis. I couldn't because of the job I had at the time. And you guys actually offered me a training position at the school, and I couldn't accept that. But fast forward to, gosh, it was almost a year after that, I think, to the day, not to the day, but it was August. It was in August. We had the ballpark show for Metro Pro, where I had the street fight with Tommy Dreamer all around the place.
Yeah,
and that's where it was first proposed to me about the whole NWL thing. And now, you had already told me about Major coming into the picture and all these different things, and I had met with Major and talked about a consulting role, and that part of it never took off, the consulting thing. I had torn my bicep that year, and it's always funny how they're like, well, you can maybe work out when you have an injury. At least for me, you can work out here in about a month. And then all of a sudden I got mad. I was like, what do you mean I can't work out? Because you took away a choice of mine. It wasn't like I was in great shape when I started this thing. My bicep snapped because some kid decided to play Shawn Michaels in the ring and rear his head back while my hand was on his head.
I remember
and
that.
My bicep snapped. Yeah, so I had to repair that. Well, my timetable for getting repaired ended up being, I think it was August of 2017 that I was finally cleared. And I'd come up to watch an NWL show just to kind of clear my head and just, see the world. And I hadn't been up to KC in a while. And again, KC has become kind of like my second home. I say second home, Chicago's hometown. Home for me is Orlando, but you understand what I say when I say that.
Sure.
It's one of my favorite cities. It's a home away from home for sure. And I watched the show, and I saw the video screens, and I saw the production going on, and I was hooked. I was like, there's the bug again. I was like, I want to do this. I want to do this. So that was it. And the foundation started, and I actually remember talking to you, like, maybe I could come in and just put people over. Maybe I could be a ref. And you're like, you're not doing that, but to be honest with you, I thought we were just going to help out the newer guys, when what was needed was to help out the newer guys, but help steer the ship. And I say that as humbly as possible, but a lot of the guys picked were newer guys that didn't have a clue of how to quite do that yet.
Sure.
And I don't think I'm knocking anybody by saying there's certain ways to lead matches and lead a show and do stuff, or your presence, and just to, I had to slow down Fitchett and Vega from the stuff they did, and they knew that, but they were cool with that, because our style was to, at least my style, being that age at that point, was to, I still wanted to do some cool stuff, but there's no reason to run around like crazy, and it's a wrestling match. Like, to me, that's the word that's on the marquee. So let's adhere to that a little bit here. And I thought it was great. We were on local TV. I know St. Louis didn't ever kick off, but at the time I lived in Springfield, Missouri. It ended up being on in Springfield. It was on in Joplin, Kansas City TV. I don't know where else the scope was, but you were running shows so much that it was like, it wasn't a 5-6 day a week territory, but was the closest thing, because of the local television we had, to being a tiny little, like, modern day territory, dare I say, is the way I felt.
Yeah, it was. And we were in Gulf Shores. We were on a bunch. We started getting our show out distributed, but it came and went as fast as it went as fast as it came almost. But the fun that we all had, and I always just tell people it was some of the best times of my life, just because I got to hang out with some friends, do wrestling again as a full-time job, and got to see everybody some more. So it was great, really.
It was a blast.
Yeah, I talked to Marty Bell the other day. She told me she saw you down in, you're doing Dave Marquez's latest project, which is Derby City Wrestling, and I know she's a part of that. But every time, here's the thing about NWL people now, Ace, and I know you have this with multiple other companies, but people that took part in NWL, and that was their first big company, we're all sort of, like brothers in arms, sisters in arms from that. You're in the same war together in the wrestling business. So, like, we're all connected. So it's like when I see these people, Dak Draper, or, anyone that's, like, gone out and I don't see them very often, and you pick up the phone and you talk to them, and it's like we can all relate to, even though it was only a couple of years, really, everything that went down was so intense that it's very memorable.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, if you think about, what did I work there, 6 months? I knew a lot of the KC people, but in 6 months, these people that I got to know, and including foundation people, like, I wasn't particularly close to.
Yeah.
I was close to you more than anything. But I was close to you more than anything. But when I came into work, like, we had such a good crew. Like, that locker room, I'll say it again, the guys and girls that were there, like, throughout towards the end up until the opening. Like, I was supposed to work Dr. Tom in a street fight. Like, we were having such a fun time, and we had such a strong crew that that was the thing that was, so disheartening about it. But as far as the experience goes, if you told me I was only going to be able to do this for 6 months again, I'd do it all over again, because it was such a blast. I loved the people I worked with. Not everybody loves everybody, but, on the whole, we all, like, kind of look at each other like, oh man, like, we were in the trenches for this thing, and we produced some good stuff, for the short run that we had. Like, it was so fun, and for those who had not experienced things, like, I know probably myself and Marty, and, well, obviously you, but as far as, like, wrestlers, besides the ones you would bring in, no one else really got to experience a major promotion in any way, shape, or form. And this was a great way to, like, kind of get them moving along, to where Dak went off and did some Ring of Honor, and he's doing NWA, and Moonshine's done, plenty of different things. Like, everybody's working around different places. Marty's popping up all over again, Lucy's reffing now. Like, there's still so much we gain from that experience. It's just,
there's people that
professionally and the camaraderie.
There's people that still use the gimmicks, like I bring up, Gil Rogers listens to this podcast, and he's a guy, he continues to be Gil Rogers everywhere else. That was an NWL gimmick, Roscoe Leach, our friend Barry, he goes by Flex Zerba when he still works, it's all, Niles Planquet, he still goes by that. There's so many gimmicks and, like, things that came out of it that for those who really wanted to embrace it and have fun with it, as we've talked about several times in the show, you could really work in your advantage if you had an open mind and wanted to, use as much as you could out of it. But, obviously we know the ones that didn't want to do that, and it totally, it just backfired on them and me, because they didn't really buy in. But the ones that did, I thought, barring the final, how it ended, which was pretty abrupt. But other than that, the entire thing was really cool. And what I think's cool is, like, time has helped everyone's sort of opinion on NWL that sort of had most of the people had a negative opinion on it, because they now look back on it with fondness, because, again, like you said, young guys never really had a situation like this. You don't really know what you have when you're in your 20s, and your ego's big, you want to go around the world, whatever. And then, that's why Dak Draper was always a big, he'd bought in because he had gone through NXT. He was in some of the first iterations of NXT. So he had sort of understood, hey, this doesn't grow on trees, like, embrace it, appreciate it. And he did.
Right.
And people like you did too. I mean, that's again, experience. And I think it's cool that people can look back and now they say, like, that was really cool. And maybe I didn't really embrace it as much as I should have.
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about this on our own many a time. And actually, I had this feeling once upon a time, and this is for if any young worker ever hears this and it resonates with you, or me. I always wanted, the name Ace Steel came because I just thought of it in high school. It's the most generic wrestling name ever. And I still, to this day, like, I want to put a hood on and wrestle or whatever. And like, no, we want you to wrestle as Ace. And I'm like, but I don't want to be Ace Steel. I want to put a mask on and be someone else. Like, I wish when I was in WWE developmental, they changed my fucking name. I did. I wanted them to, and they didn't. Like, I wanted a new identity. And at that point, I realized, because I was in my mid-30s when I ended up getting hired in developmental, like, a day late, dollar short in my case. Like, it wasn't the fucking time. But I had worked shows for a guy who ran, shows and gave me different names at different point, but he had name workers on there like Jerry Lawler. Like, I worked Brian Christopher, Sergeant Slaughter would be on there, and those guys worked for the Fed at the time. And I was like, no, I've got to be me. I've got to have my gimmick on so they can see me. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your name's fucking, I just say Joe Blow. Like, that's not very original, but whatever the hell your name is does not matter. They look at you and go, wow, look at that kid work. I bet we could do something with him. It doesn't matter who you are, what your name is. You got the look, and you can work, or you can work enough where we can put you in said character or ability, whatever, along the same lines of, we're gonna take Glenn Jacobs and make him Isaac Yankem, and then now we're gonna make him Kane. Like, oh, I have this idea that he fits in perfect for this. The fact that NWL just wanted to give someone a different name and try something else, it doesn't matter. It does not matter. You could break back out and be your indie name guy and go out and work all the shows and be whoever you are. In fact, at the time, you didn't care if they worked under their old names anywhere. You just didn't work under that name at NWL. And a lot of people had problems with that. There's people that had gear made for them that were stupidly just left and then turned into other gear. Like, what's wrong with you? Some place made you gear and bought you boots, and you decided to leave because you didn't like the gimmick. Like, you really have something wrong up top to not see the forest through the trees with this thing. Who cares? You're basically acting at this point. Sure. Not everybody walks into their first acting part and gets to say, well, I don't want to be called fucking, Ray Liotta doesn't say I don't want to be called Henry Hill.
Sure.
I mean, that's a very extreme example.
No, I completely agree. I've gone on tirades about this left and right. I mean, I just don't understand, especially the full-timers that, NWL was the first independent company that I know of that for more than, a cup of coffee, it was there for 2 years almost. People had full-time jobs, had benefits, they could pick to have their housing paid for based on how they structured their salary or whatever. But, I mean, this is a company thing that doesn't exist. I mean, even ADW doesn't do that to their, a lot of their guys. I mean, we were comparable paying to NXT at the time, and, you're in the Midwest and you could basically go home a lot because a lot of the people were from around here. But and the only thing that they asked is that here we want a new gimmick under this company. Some of the part-timers, hey, we want you to have a gimmick just here and you can go wrestle everywhere else, as like you said, Joe Blow or whatever. And, some people still had a problem with that. But that's immaturity, inexperience, not understanding, like forest from the trees, like you said. So, at the time it infuriated me, but I get it now as I get older.
Yeah, I mean, it should hopefully be a lesson for these people. Like, look at what you missed out on. Look at, like, if you just work, I've seen this, like, with Derby City even last week. Like, some guys ran in and did an angle at the end of a match. Like, I don't know if it was a match that didn't happen or was supposed to happen, but when you work television, you don't just go into business for yourself and do something out of the box. Like, structure, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is like, when you work with no structure, you don't ever learn structure. When the structure is implemented in your game plan, like, you get all wonky and it's messed up. Like, this business works better with just a little bit of structure, like keeping in your times and letting people in, what's going to happen next. Like, if you were booked to come out and you're still making the same payday, if you're booked to come out and lose in 2 minutes or 1 minute because it's the angle you're doing, realize the beauty of the angle and the pop you're going to get when you came out and got walloped and 1, 2, 3. Oh my God. Like, you're being a utility and a team player. Like, it's a different world, like, you just got to look at the bigger scope of things, that you didn't work a 10 or 12 minute match, or, honestly, for anyone working 20-minute matches anymore. And I used to do a lot of them because when I worked for Harley, he would always give me time, knew I could fill the time, 15, 20 minutes. I even went 25 minutes once with Punk in Eldon. And we had the people. But to be honest with you, you can get everything done in 10 to 12 minutes. And it takes forever to learn that, hey, I can get this done. You don't need to do everything in the book. Just because you can doesn't mean you do. And like a lot of guys, like again, they don't see the forest through the trees, especially with something like that. With gimmicks given, I didn't mean to get you back on a tirade, but the beauty of that place was it was such a learning ground for doing some TV, doing character work, and just like we had a lot of fun.
Sure.
That's mostly why we all like each other. We're still connected because we all had a freaking blast. I still talk to Barry quite a bit. We got to know each other more from doing this, and we only worked once, I think. But it was the fact you see these people, or I got to be closer with Niles Plonk, with Craig, just because you see these people, and it's such a joy to like create this thing.
The thing that I enjoy the most that you brought to the NWL was when you were hit in the head with the trash can and it became a GIF, an animated GIF, whatever you call it.
Yes.
That is that. So I know those guys looked up to you, Vega and Fitchett, and when you guys had your street fight, that was a classic spot that everyone in the NWL knows exactly what it is. But
I'm so proud of that. I still am, but I think the street fight holds up. Like we put a lot into that.
Yeah,
we put a lot into that. Like in fact, last year I worked Fitchett in AAW because he needed an opponent. We ended up having our own street fight, a little reminiscent of that, where I actually dunked him with a garbage can just on my own, Easter egg. And I was the heel. Well, I was the heel the last time. I was supposed. I was the heel this time too. But there was something in Fitchett to go back to say it. And I worked Vega last year too. And he's come along so much as a wrestler, like the maturity as a wrestler in the ring. And then to wrestle Fitchett, to see something emerge on him. He's out with an injury now, or on his way back from it. But to see these guys mature, it's the part of me that wanted to be a coach, and I am a full-time coach, to work with these guys and see that, man, I left not my fingerprints on them exactly, but I at least left them in something in a better place to help them along. Like hopefully us working together put something in their head that they take along with them. Like when I work with a guy who maybe isn't a super known guy, but left me with something, or when Tracy Smothers grabbed me, and he grabbed all of us at the Steel Domain, and we worked with him. Tracy Smothers meant so much to us because he was one of the first stars that would work with us and back and forth. Even a guy like Sabu, when I worked with him, there's so many things I learned from him, and you're like, Sabu's just a crazy garbage wrestler. He is not. He's got such a mind for the business. He does some crazy shit, just again like Mick Foley, but it's very calculated. It's controlled chaos in a lot of ways. I mean, and I hope with guys like that or whoever I worked with Dak once, things. There's lessons you take, and I hope there's things that I was able to give, and it's the full circle thing. Like I learned so much. I hope what I have, and again, I'm not a know-it-all, but things I've gotten to take, and now I'm definitely an old-timer here. I never thought I'd say that, but at 50 years old, even at this point, to give those guys some nuggets,
Sure. I think, I mean, obviously, I say this about you, Dr. Tom. It's the guy, and this is in every sport. Baseball's like this too. Harley Race is one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. Is he the greatest trainer / teacher? I don't know, because a lot of those times those guys are purely, they're purely just great because naturally, and it's hard for them to teach, some guy everything that you know. And so it becomes a point to where guys like you, Dr. Tom, and others that I can go on a list for a while, but Rip Rogers, there's guys like that train, and they weren't necessarily the biggest stars in the world, but they had to endure a lot more during their entire career, so they teach better, and I think that's what makes you such a good teacher.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. And yeah, you're right. I was talking to Rip this past weekend. I crossed paths with him in OVW way back in 2007, but I didn't sit and talk with him or bug him. And we just sat and told stories. I listened mainly to him tell stories because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to hear some analogies. I wanted to hear some nuggets that I could take with me. And same always with Dr. Tom, who's great. I appreciate that compliment.
By the way, before I let you go, you brought up Tracy Smother, and I wanted to bring this up because do you remember, were you at the Metro show when he cut the 45-minute promo?
Yes, I have a little bit of footage of him coming out, I think, actually on my phone that I was recording him.
Oh, my God.
And sat there in horror, like, oh, why didn't you give Tracy a time limit?
So, for anyone that didn't get to go to that show, Tracy Smothers was brought into a Metro Pro show. It was like 2015, and I love Tracy Smothers. God rest, rest in peace. He was an awesome dude, and he was so cool. And like you said, like he's a known tough guy, but he didn't act that way at all. And he was a big giver, and I miss the dude immensely because I enjoyed talking to him on the phone and just meeting him. But when he came in, we didn't give him a time limit, and he gave me this thing where he's like, well, Chris, I haven't had a match for a while, so I'm pretty rusty, so I'm going to go out there and, whatever. So he goes out there, and he cuts a promo, and he has two guys that are sort of workers from wherever, and they were his sons, and he went out there, and he cut an opening promo before he was going to have a match, and the match wasn't supposed to be more than like 5-10 minutes, nothing. It was more just him cutting a heel promo and stuff. And he goes out there, and it was the only time I ever saw anyone leave the matches because they were infuriated with how bored they were, because he was cutting a 45-minute promo before the match, and the match was literally like 3 moves and it was over. And but it was very memorable, and I miss Tracy Smothers.
I do miss Tracy Smothers. Last time I saw him was after NWL folded in 2018, and Brian Thompson ran a show at the Speedway in Lebanon, and I went up there, and Tracy was a special guest, I think just because he loved Tracy too. And I wrestled, quickly got the hell out, and Lucy knew, because I would always talk up Tracy so much that I just spent the night talking to Tracy, just him about the Armstrongs. If you know me intimately, Brad Armstrong is one of my favorite wrestlers, so I'm talking about Brad. And I'm buddies with Scott Armstrong. But I would talk to him about that. He was just telling me great stories, but just an overall, like, a great last time to see him, have a great memory. But yeah, he helped out. And he was on Facebook a lot. He was on Facebook for a while active, and it was actually him, and he would see things that I'd post, and he would just, say things like, love you guys. I'm like, you meant so much to us at Steel Domain. Everyone that would travel around and get to work with him, and that was a shoot. Like, he taught us a lot.
No, he was great. I miss him too. Yes, I interacted with him all the time. He was always throwing out some crazy stuff on Facebook, which was always fun to read. But Ace, I kept you a long time. Thanks for joining us on the worst territory in the world. You're a good friend, and thanks for being on.
Hey, thank you. Hope to see you in, I don't know when the hell this plays, but personally, I'll see you probably in about a week.
Okay. See you, man.
It's the worst territory.
And there you have it, my interview with a longtime friend of mine, Ace Steele. And when all this stuff about Ace hit the news in the last, obviously, year or so, I thought he completely got railroaded. Ace Steele is an awesome guy. He's a completely loyal guy as well, and he does not do anything out of character for him unless it is completely warranted. And of course, if you've read what's on the internet, and I know this is true, 90% of what you read on the internet, usually hearsay or false, it turns out. I know it's shocking that not everything you read on the internet is true. But I'm sure Ace Steele is going to be a contributor to pro wrestling for a very long time. I've been a longtime friend also with his wife, Lucy Mendez, so it's great to still have friends that I can chat with about not only the past, but the current wrestling scene as well. I want to tell everybody I appreciate everyone that's writing me direct messages, emails about the podcast. It's been really fun to relive the glory days of Central States, Kansas City, like I said, then and now, because I enjoy talking Metro Pro and NWL in the Kansas City, as well as the old school Bob Geigel, Harley Race, Pat O'Connor era. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to this. And, join us over on our Facebook page, facebook.com/worstwrestling. I've really enjoyed getting direct messages and emails from people telling me how much they like the podcast over there, or some people have been giving me tips on who to have on because they know some of these guys that used to wrestle in the Central States territory that have Facebook pages or have jobs around the country, and I've already lined up several interviews based on that. So I want to thank you guys and keep them coming, because I still want to talk to anybody that ever spent more than a cup of coffee in the Kansas City Central States area. Anyway, thanks a lot, guys, for listening. I am Chris Goff, and this has been another episode of the worst territory in the world. We'll see you next time.
It's the worst territory in